Wow, hey, welcome back to Life of Bliss. Today I'm going to be going over how I built that monster back there, the GSG Audio Evolution Series dual 18-inch enclosure. So let's jump into the build, but first let's go over the tools that we're going to need. Now real quick, this is going to be the first video in a series of videos for the Evolution boxes. I have the dual 18, the dual 21, and the single 24-inch boxes here that I'll be building. So if you see something in this video that you'd like me to touch on further in the next videos, on the build videos for the other two boxes, or maybe I don't touch on something at all, please let me know. I will try to do so for the next videos. Like I said, there's going to be several videos in this series, including how to prep them for paint, finishing them, installing the woofers, in-room response. So plenty of content on these boxes, so be sure to subscribe. But first, like I said, let's talk about tools. The biggest thing that you are going to have for this is a lot of clamps. And you'll be able to see throughout the process how I use them and kind of how many I use in certain areas. But you don't need to go out and spend a bunch of money on these nice Bessie clamps. These I think are like $65 a piece. They're 4-foot clamps. They're great clamps, but if you're not going to be doing this sort of stuff a lot, don't spend the money on nicer clamps like that. These are cheaper Master Force clamps from Menards. 3-foot clamps, they have larger clamps as well, but they're about half the cost of the Bessies. And then you have the El Cheapo clamps, the tool shop clamps that I have. I've used these for years with my other builds. There's nothing wrong with these. They're probably about $20 for a large clamp like this. So don't spend a ton of money if this is the only thing you plan on using the clamps for, but you will need a variety of sizes. I've got some smaller 2-foot clamps here, 3-foot, 4-foot clamps. I think these may be actually a little bit longer than 4-foot once they're all the way extended. And then also just some of these smaller hand clamps for some smaller areas. So definitely pay attention to how these clamps are used and where they're used in the video. Assess how many you're going to need and go from there. So the other thing you are absolutely going to have is wood glue. Now I tend to use Titebond 2 for mine. Be sure you have a bottle with a nice dispensing cap on it. This one here is held together by Gorilla Tape. And if you don't have something in your garage or shop held together with Gorilla Tape, I don't want to know you. So like I said, be sure you have something that can dispense the stuff easily. I clearly need to clean my bottle up. But moving on, definitely want to have a tape measure, some way to mark on the wood, pencil, and a square is going to be nice. Now you don't have to have these, but it is easier for drawing some lines, especially if you're going to be nailing things together like I did, instead of just setting it up and clamping and leaving it for the glue to dry. Now along with that, some sort of straight edge. Either I've got this longer straight edge here or a level, just to be able to mark off some of these spots where the bracing is going to be, where I nailed it. You'll see more about that in the video coming up. But speaking of nailing, an 18 gauge brad nail gun is a good thing to have if you kind of want to keep things moving and not just set the clamps on there and wait a few hours for this glue to dry. If you want to set something up, nail it, you can remove the clamps and move on from there. So something to think about if you're wanting to put this together a little faster and you have one of these already. Now the nail size that I'm using is 1 3/16 inches. Really anything over 3/4 inch, but under 1.5 inch is where you want to shoot for. So 1 3/16 inches is what I use. Now you will also want a hammer and some way to punch in some dowel rods. I didn't have a great punch, but I've got an Allen wrench. So make do with what you have. And you'll also need another smaller Allen wrench to put in the threaded inserts, which again, you will see later. Now, along with the hammer, one thing you might possibly need is either a mallet or a hammer with another block of wood to help coax some of these pieces into place. I only had 1 or 2 that I needed to use this on, just to kind of get it flush with the face, which you'll see later. But I did have to use that, so I did want you guys to know you might have to use something to get these braces and pieces of wood back into their position and flush so the rest of the box goes together smoothly. Now, at various stages while putting this together, I did use some weight to be able to weigh down the top of the box or weigh down that panel. So have something heavy around, bag of sand, weights, whatever. Just make sure you have something to help compress that down and help get everything set up nice and tight. So let's talk paint real quick. I wanted these boxes to be completely black, including inside of the port area. So there is one stage in the process where I did use some spray paint before any of the prep work or anything like that. You might be able to see the inside of the port is already black. It's much easier to do that during the build process than waiting until you're prepping and painting the final finish on there. So be sure to grab some sort of black paint and primer. This is just some ultra matte black Rust-Oleum. So just grab something if you're wanting those ports to be completely blacked out. And last, you will definitely want to go to GSG's website, print off their instructions on how to build these boxes and follow them. Now, this video is not going to be following these instructions and just telling you how to do everything on here. You already have these printed out. You'll be able to get that off their website. This is more tips and tricks on how I put everything together while following the instructions. So just keep that in mind. This is definitely something to print off and follow while you're putting it together. This has to go together in certain steps, so you do not want to be skipping or missing any steps. All right, so I think that is it for the tools that I used. And one thing you'll notice, I have no table saw out here. I have no router out here. I have no large power tools out here because GSG makes this to where you can put these together with just some clamps, some glue, and a couple other of normal household tools really. So you don't need to go out and buy expensive power tools to be able to make something like this, a larger custom subwoofer box, and get into the DIY games. And I can say from experience now that these go together very easily and fairly quickly, much faster than designing, cutting, and putting together your own box. And really, it's a great product for people to jump into the DIY realm without having to buy a bunch of power tools. So I was pretty excited to get this together. I'm excited to get the other two boxes together as well. But for now, let's go ahead and get started on building this dual 18-inch enclosure. All right, so I have everything separated out to where I can find all of my pieces there. I believe I counted 37 pieces total. And I also have a piece of MDF, a scrap piece of MDF, just on the floor to make this easier to assemble so I'm not getting a bunch of wood glue on the floor or something like that. And this is also a good flat workspace. So they do ship like that piece down there. That's an extra piece of MDF that they had on the pallet. So I would suggest just using that as your base, and then also be sure that you're not throwing away or overlooking all these small pieces. So there are several small pieces of MDF that are part of the box, and they will not be scrap unless it's marked scrap. So be sure to account for all these pieces, hang on to them, and now we're going to start following the directions, getting everything together.
All right, let's get started with the fun stuff. So first thing, as you're going through this process, be sure you're test fitting your pieces before you glue them and before you nail them in place. You do not want to be putting the wrong pieces in the wrong dados or the wrong braces in the wrong spot. So just be sure to test fit everything before you get to that step. Now you'll also notice throughout this process, I'm going through and marking on the back side of the boards where all of these dados are cut out. This is so I have a good reference mark to go back and use the brad nail gun to be able to secure these pieces along the way. Now throughout this process, you want to be pretty liberal with that tight bond wood glue that you're putting in there. You want to coat both surfaces, and you really want that seeping out of the edges as you are clamping things down. This will ensure good coverage on both pieces of wood and ensure a tight bond between the two pieces. Now also pay attention throughout this process how I'm using these clamps. Not only am I putting downward pressure on those pieces of wood, but I'm also making sure all of the edges are flush too.
I did these outside ones first because I wanted to throw a few brad nails to hold this together, and I wouldn't be able to do so with these braces here. So do the outside, work your way in on these. These I will just nail from the underside a few times, and the base here will be ready to go.
Now this will be a little more important later in the build when we start doing the outside edges of the box, but it's never a bad idea to throw a little bit of wood glue in all of the seams and then smoothing that out with your finger. This is going to ensure you have a strong connection and to also seal up any gaps that you have in the wood.
Now the biggest advantage to using a nail gun while you're doing this is now I can pick this up, move it where I need to, it doesn't have a bunch of clamps on it, and I can set it out of the way and start working on my other pieces. This is going to make the process go a lot faster and turn this job into hopefully just a couple of hours instead of a couple of days while we're waiting glue to dry.
Waiting glue to dry. Makes a lot of sense, Kyle. All right, so here you can see making some more lines, and this is just, again, to speed up that nailing process. Once everything is glued, I have reference points on where to put the brad nails. Next, to move on to the bottom piece to put together, and you guessed it, There's going to be some gluing, there's going to be some clamping, and there's going to be some nailing. So just follow the process, get everything set up, and then we'll move on to something more fun in a minute.
So that is 3 pieces together now, and as you can see, using brad nails makes things much faster. It took me probably 15 minutes to put this piece together, and I can already move it around. We're not utilizing a bunch of clamps, having to wait a few hours to let it dry. If you were only using clamps and glue, I'd wait a solid 3 hours probably before moving any of these pieces. But this really is not taking a long time. I've spent maybe a little over an hour putting these together so far. So I'm going to call it a night for tonight and start back up with this tomorrow.
The following day.
So after the glue has set up on the base of the port, so this is going to be the port area, this is the bottom, this is actually the top of where the port area is. This will sit on top like that. Your arrow, it doesn't matter which way it is right now, but the arrow is on the other side of this piece. I'm going to go ahead and paint these black now because it's going to be a lot easier to do that now with everything apart than it is when the entire box is together and trying to get all the way back inside these ports. And this is just aesthetically, just to make it better looking. It's going to be black inside of these ports instead of MDF color. Now I did just run some tape along all of the places that we still need to throw some glue and attach to other boards, so I didn't want to get paint on those to get a good bond to that MDF. So like I said, I've got Rust-Oleum Ultra Matte Black that I'm going to be throwing on there, primer and paint. So get these painted up and continue on with the boxes.
Alright, so after about 4 or 5 light coats, you should have a pretty good dark base on there. And be sure to hit that end grain on that MDF a few extra times because that will suck up the paint quite a bit. And when you're done, just remove the tape and admire those straight lines you just made. Following the directions and moving on to the side pieces, it's a really good idea to just mark all of those dados out if you're using a brad nail gun, to make sure you can quickly and easily just set everything up with some nails as you move forward from here on out. Now adding the port bottom and back bracing, I'm test fitting everything up to make sure it's going to look good before adding glue and then nailing everything together, but I'll let you watch the process of that here. Before nailing the back of the port on, I went ahead and added the other side, and that way I could clamp both together. Well, I would add it if I could figure out which way I actually wanted to stand to put it on there. It was a little awkward. It was a big piece, but figured out a way, got it on, clamped everything down, and then threw some nails in.
So the next piece I'm going to be putting in is the top of the port, and that is the piece that we painted black on the top. Now, it has an arrow towards the back. Be sure you're putting it in the right direction. And it's going to be a little tight, but I found if you start one piece over there and then come over and start the other, it will start sliding in. I'm going to put just a little bit of glue on the tops of these pieces, and obviously on the inside of the walls here, to make sure it's secure, but make sure it's pushed all the way back, and then once this is in, be sure to put some clamps on the front side to push it down, and then also push down on the back when you're nailing this, because this needs to be all the way down to the bottom, or else all of your bracing will be sticking up out of the top.
This piece did give me a little trouble on the way in. It was just a little tight about halfway through. And as you can see, I started using my hand to hit it in, which did not feel the best. So we moved to a rubber mallet and went side to side, and that got it in there just fine. Just be sure you don't mess up that front edge as you're doing something like this if you have that issue. And as I'm putting it in there, notice I put some glue on that back edge there just to make sure it was all sealed up. And there we go. Port is done. Well, almost done. We still have to clamp and nail everything. So for the back side of this, since there's not a great place to clamp, just use whatever weight you have available, even body weight.
So one other tip, if you're not going to be putting this together all at one time and you're not going to be putting the bracing in for a while, be sure to come back into these little areas, clean out as much as that glue as you can, because if that hardens, that's going to stop that brace from pushing all the way up against this back wall, and it could possibly be sticking out of the front, which is going to throw off your alignment for your front baffles.
Now that is some sound advice and a sweaty shirt. All right, for the top here, just like everything else, we're going to glue, place that down, and this doesn't have a great way to clamp from top to bottom unless you have some really long clamps. So just grab some weights or whatever you have that's heavy to set on top. Be sure to use clamps to get everything else nice and tight, throw some nails in there, and you're done with the top.
And now we're getting to the outside finished portion of the box, so this is really important to clean up all of this glue that's squeezed out. And it's not a bad idea just to kind of push it up into the end grain of this top board. So this is the flat side of the MDF. All of these are end grains where it's a little bit rougher, and that glue will help seal that a little bit, whether you're going to be painting later or veneering, doesn't matter. That helps seal that end grain just a little bit, but just be sure, take a little bit of a wet rag, wipe off that glue, and that's going to save you a lot of prep work later.
Having fun yet? I hope so, because now it's time to flip the box over on its top, and we're going to put the bottom piece on. Now, just like everything else, we're going to glue, we're going to clamp, we're going to nail. And luckily, we've done this several times, so you know that process, because something happened to my footage, and I don't have all of it. So there you go, the bottom's on. Now with the rectangular structure of the box built, it's time to add in some bracing. Now all those lines that we drew earlier on the outside of the box where the dados are really come in handy, because all we have to do is glue, clamp, and then set some nails in on those lines that we drew earlier. Now you also want to pay super close attention to the instructions on this part to make sure you're putting those braces in the correct spot. You do not want to mess that part up. Now after the 4 smaller braces are put in, it's time to put in the larger vertical braces. Now, these actually went in pretty easy, just pushing a little bit on the top and bottom until they were all the way back. As you can see, that vertical brace actually rests up against one of these smaller horizontal braces. You'll want to throw some glue on the top side of that joint, kind of work it in, and then set a clamp there, and either throw some brad nails in if possible, or just let it set up over the next hour or two. Now getting the rest of this brace clamped and nailed into place, I'll show you something on the back side here where if you don't have a long enough clamp to span a space, you can actually just take 2 clamps and have them meet in the middle, and it serves the same purpose as having a longer clamp. Also, before doing the final nail in, make sure you take a straight edge and make sure that the brace is not sticking out from the front. The front baffle will not go on correctly if it's sticking out too far.
So now it's going to be a good time to let this set up a little bit. Maybe grab a bottle of water since it's blazing hot down here. I'm going to go ahead and leave these clamps up top. I was able to nail them, but the main ones are down here on the bottom. There was no real good way to nail those into place. I went ahead and added some extra glue along all the sides just to make sure it's got a nice tight bond. Leave those on there until the glue sets up. I can still come back and put in some of these cross braces or even work on the front baffle while that sets up, but I'll give this a couple hours before I remove those and then continue on.
Much later.
All right, so I'm in the home stretch of getting this box done. I think yesterday putting on the sides and these vertical braces, that was probably, I'm gonna say, the hardest and most time consuming as far as like needing to get all of it together at once stage. Now I just need to get some of these horizontal braces in, as well as the back panel, which would be pretty quick and easy, and then gluing up the front baffle and getting it set in there. So go ahead, get all these started and see where we can get today.
Now, these horizontal braces actually went in pretty smooth, but I didn't want to glue, clamp, and nail each one as I went. I wanted to put them all in and then clamp and nail all of them at the same time. That way it wouldn't get too tight as I worked my way down. Now, unfortunately, one of these did give me a little bit of trouble, and that's when I got the mallet out again and had to use a block of wood with the mallet to knock that into place. Now, if you do this, just make sure you're not messing up the front side of that brace. If you do, you might have to do some sanding to get it back smooth again. Now, luckily with that block, it didn't mess up the face of that baffle, but it did take some persuasion to get back in there. You're like with everything else, I wanted to make sure everything was nice and tight, so multiple clamps, going back, nailing everything, and moving on to the next one. Now we will move on to the back side. Now you'll want to use a lot of glue in this stage, and as you can see, I put a good coat down, smoothed out all of the glue over the surface so it gets a good contact. And then I added some more. I just really wanted to make sure that that back piece is going to have a good seal. After laying that piece on, you'll notice that it will want to glide around anytime you put clamps on, so I went ahead and got it lined up, put a couple nails up in the top, and that allowed me to clamp the rest of the back piece down without it sliding all over the place and worrying about alignment. And when it came time to nailing the rest of the box, I just removed some of the clamps from one area, tightened down where I was planning on nailing, and just moved around the box until I got everything nailed down and secured.
Alright, so I have the entire box put together behind me there besides the front baffle, which we'll go ahead and get together now. This comes in 3 separate pieces stacked on top of each other. This is the top baffle, and the other 2 are the same size underneath it. This has a little bit larger cutout to recess that woofer. And they all have this 45-degree angle on the top and bottom, so you'll obviously be able to get them put together in the right configuration. They have a bunch of holes here in the front, 6 holes that we're going to be putting some dowel rods in. Now these don't come cut to size. You'll have to cut these down to 1.5 inches and drive those down just to make sure everything lines up properly. But I'll go ahead and get those cut down, get everything lined up. These are actually some holes for a grill guide. If you're going to be doing a grill, you can either put some neodymium magnets in there or use something like some dowel rods attached to a grill and throw a grill on there if you want. I'm not going to be doing a grill, so we're going to be filling these in here later in the prep stage before painting, but we will use the dowel rods to get everything lined up correctly, so let's go ahead and get that done.
Now the dowel rods will not be cut to size, so look at your instructions, see what thickness you need to cut them to, and cut them down. I believe mine needed to be 1.5 inches thick. Now for the front baffle, we'll start with the bottom piece first and just start smothering glue all over the surface. So I just took my container of glue, poured it all over, and used some sort of spreader to get it spread around. We'll lay the second piece of the baffle on there, do the same thing with the wood glue, get that spread around, and grab the third. Now once the third baffle is set up top, you'll take those wood dowels, start pushing them in, and then you'll need to hit them in somehow. Like I said, I used a hammer and just an Allen wrench that was the correct size. Now you want to make sure to hit those all the way down to the bottom, especially if you're going to be using those holes later as a grill guide. Now working my way around the baffle, I went ahead and threw some clamps on and then put brad nails in both the top and bottom side of the grill to make sure everything had a nice hold. Now again, that wood glue is doing 99% of the work and is much stronger than the brad nails. Those are just there to hold it together while the wood glue cures. Also, once you're done with this phase, you will want to go back and clean up some of this glue. Doing so now is going to save you a lot of prep work later.
All right, so let the front baffle set overnight, and this thing is solid. Everything fit up really nice. Everything's super smooth in the port. All of these angles here are pretty darn smooth. There's going to be just a little bit of sanding to get this ready for paint, but really using those dowel rods and the guide holes here really set everything up pretty square. So I'm pretty happy the way this all came together. Before we throw it on the box, I've got some of these insert screws that I'm going to be putting on the backside for the holes that we're going to be securing the woofers with. So I'm going to turn this over and show you the process of getting these glued in.
Now, I'm actually a pretty big fan over these versus traditional T-nuts. These seem like they are going to grip a lot better to that MDF, and the reason I'm gluing these in is just for a little extra insurance. I just want to make sure that these will never be backing out, they'll never be stripping out the wood, and we have the issue of a screw stuck inside of the enclosure and not being able to get our subwoofer out. So as you can see, after adding a little bit of wood glue to the teeth of that insert nut, I just screwed it in nice and tight and wiped away any of the excess glue. Now, one thing to make sure of is to not get any of that glue inside of the threaded area. This could cause trouble later when securing the subwoofer, getting the screw started, or fully seated in the insert nut. Now, thank goodness it is time for the final step, and that is putting on the front baffle on this behemoth. And just like that, it's done. No, actually it's not. We gotta actually glue it on and clamp it and do all that stuff that we've done before. So I want to set it on the box first to make sure everything lined up well before I threw some glue on and set it in place. Now again, you'll want to be very generous with the glue to make sure you're getting a good seal all around the box. Carefully lay it in place. Careful. There you go. Like I mentioned with the rear panel, the front panel will want to start moving and sliding around on you on that wood glue, so it will take some time to get those clamps tightened down and get everything lined up properly. Just take your time, go around it slowly, start increasing your pressure on the clamps as you go, and then once you get enough on to hold it in place, add the rest of your clamps and let it sit. And if you use enough wood glue earlier, you should be seeing a lot of that seep out from the edge of the front baffle. This will not only hold that front baffle onto the box, but it will also completely seal the enclosure. And after letting that front baffle set up overnight, we have a completed subwoofer enclosure that we did not have to use a table saw for, a router for, or really any other major power tools. Pretty cool.
So there we go, the complete start to finish on how to get one of these GSG Evolution boxes built. Now I've got the dual 21 and the single 24 coming up. Let me know in the comments what you would like to see in those next two videos. If there's something that you'd like me to touch on more, or something maybe I didn't cover at all, let me know down in the comments below. I will try my best to get all of your questions answered or include that in the next video. So overall time that I spent on this, I think I was down here a total of 4 days and a couple hours each day. I would say I probably spent about 6 to 7 hours total, maybe a bit more getting this all together. I think the next box is going to go a little bit quicker, but the biggest pieces of time that I spent down here were spent getting the sides and top on all at one time. The bracing took a little bit of time, but also this front baffle, getting it all lined up, letting it set up, and then getting it all square on the front of the box here. So that did take a little bit of time, so be sure you set aside a good 1 to 2 hours for those sort of steps. But really, if you wanted to just chip away at this a panel at a time, instead of using a brad nail gun, you can just use some clamps and glue and get this thing put together probably within a week if you were just gluing everything. So really not a whole lot of time spent on this, and it went together super easy. There was a couple of panels that I did have to coax in there with a either a hammer or the mallet, but it did work out really well. I think one of the bracing panels, either this one or the one below it, that took a little bit of persuasion to get in there, but it went in there just fine. It fit up, so no issues with any panel fitment or anything like that. Now once GSG comes out with their 18 that they've been working on, they've had a few prototype models that they've had on hand, but they are still finalizing their design. Once that comes out, those will be going in this box, and I'll be doing some in-room measurements and some reviews, things like that. So now that the building stage is done, I have the prep work and painting to do left on this, so I will be having videos on that. There are some edges that I need to clean up, a few hairline cracks that need to be filled. I need to take a 50-50 water and wood glue mix and go over all of this in-grain MDF to seal that up so it does not just soak up the paint that I'll be using. So I will have videos on that. Be sure to subscribe and check those out. And also, if you're wanting to see these in person, these will be at M-Wave 2023 in Kansas City, Missouri at Bartle Hall from July 14th to 16th. This is a great event that you'll be able to experience some things that you might not be able to at stores or other events. So I'll leave the link for the website down below. Be sure to check that out and make it if you can. Thank you to GSG for sending out these boxes for us to be able to make this sort of content and have at the show. So we really appreciate you guys doing that. Like I said, I've got more videos coming on these, so be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching Life of Bliss, and I will see you soon.